Historic high-level talks continued for a second day in Cuba, and it will come down to trust if both the U.S. and Cuba are to resume full diplomatic relations. It appears both sides could not agree on whether they even discussed improving human rights in Cuba. U.S. officials say it was brought up, but Cuban government officials say the talks focused on the opening of an embassy both in Cuba and in the U.S. Similar disagreements trickle down to the people on the street. My co-anchor Todd McDermott is the only local reporter in Cuba. He explains just how tough each day is for many people.
While U.S. and Cuban diplomats talked about the future today, we went to the streets of Havana to talk about the now with people. While both sides are talking about making things better for the country, right now, people here are talking more about the embargo being lifted. We heard a very different story from a small repair shop on a small street in Old Havana. Romeo Medina has to fix the tire on his bicycle taxi before he makes $1. And it will be a long day if he wants to make enough money to get by. Is it a living?
To get by.
Get by? He is 55 years old. This was not always Romeo's life, though. His friends call him Professor. He told me he was a teacher until the Cuban government accused him of being anti-Castro and took that life away.
Style of life, the human rights, the way they treat us is different. You guys in the U.S. have communications with the whole world. We don't.
The hopes of the Cuban people are high as the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State talks with their Cuban counterparts. But she made it clear here in Havana today that human rights in Cuba must improve for diplomatic progress.
On the issue of human rights, the president has spoken to the issue, and certainly that issue remains central to our conversations.
While Romeo Medina is on the street trying to eke out a living, the Cuban government's main concern during these talks is still keeping its sovereignty and keeping its political system intact. Cuban people will still be waiting in lines for government-issued fish and waiting for a better way of life to come for some time. One hurdle the Cuban diplomats talked about today is getting off the U.S. list of state sponsors of terrorism. There's been some indication over the last few weeks since President Obama's announcement that diplomatic ties could be restored, that Cuba could soon be getting off that list, but it remains to be seen. Also talk that U.S. diplomats toured the U.S. Special Interest Building where they could open an embassy in the weeks, months to come. I'm Todd McDermott in Havana, Cuba, for WPBF 25 News. It's Tanya Sandoval's 70th birthday, and she tells me the best gift she could ask for is having us see her Havana home, to see the truth about life here.
No, pero cae gotera y esto la está, si no se arregla, esto la compré tú.
Water comes in often and I have to keep fixing it.
How long do you live here?
¿Hace cuánto vivo aquí?
37 años.
37 years.
37 years. On this bed?
Yo duermo ahí.
I sleep there.
You have running water?
¿Tiene agua?
No, la cojo de la fuente.
From the well.
Her living conditions provide the reality for many Cubans, set against the backdrop of historic diplomatic talks here in Havana. The goal is to thaw long-frozen ties between the U.S. and Cuba and maybe open an embassy here and in the U.S. But that would be just the beginning.
We discussed in real and concrete terms the required steps for the reestablishment of diplomatic relations between our countries.
But any enthusiasm for dramatic sudden change drowns quickly. The Cubans talk, instead of human rights, about sovereignty and independence.
We reiterated Cuba's willingness to continue holding a respectful dialogue with the United States based on the principles of equal sovereignty and reciprocity, without prejudice to the national independence and self-determination of our people.
No, chico, es para hacerlo en la casa.
We met Ms. Sandoval around the corner from her little room where the neighbors waited for their monthly allowance of chicken and fish. This woman told me it will only last 2 days. Embassies and warm diplomatic words are nice. American dollars and food are much more important than the hard, broken streets of Havana. Now, one positive step today is the two sides began talking about further meetings that could come in weeks, not months. And the U.S. also said they are talking about what it will take to open a U.S. embassy here in Havana. They're also talking about what kinds of conditions they will put on how that embassy will open and how that embassy will operate. And that also means another list.